Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, bringing you worldwide experts from all areas of health and fitness. We cover training, nutrition, coaching, and mindset. Welcome your host, strength and conditioning coach, 2012 and 2013 CrossFit Games champ, Michael Cazayoux. Mind, body, brute.
Hello and welcome back. This is Michael Cazayoux, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week I've got Mark Devine back on the show. Coach is a former Navy SEAL, a former Navy SEAL commander. He holds an MBA and is currently the owner and founder of a company called SEALFIT, as well as Unbeatable Mind. Mark Devine is one of the most badass human beings on the planet. Today, we talk about self-mastery. We talk about his path to discovering self-mastery, his mentors along the way. We talk about why the best warriors in history embody both the hard and the soft, the yin and the yang. We talk about rituals that have led to his development of self-mastery and so much more. So with further ado, help me welcome my good friend and mentor, Mark Devine. Hey, before we start this show, I want to let you know about something I'm super pumped about right now, which is that I started a second podcast. It's called the WAG Podcast, and I do it with my wife, Adee Cazayoux. And the reason that we started this second show is because over the past few years, I've had the opportunity to interview some of the best and brightest in the health and fitness space, from New York Times bestselling authors to Olympians and CrossFit Games athletes to NFL coaches to sports psychologists, you name it, a lot of the best and the brightest. And I have also interviewed my wife, Adee, 6 or 7 times. And without fail, the episodes that get the most engagement in terms of direct messages or mentions on social media or emails are all the ones that I do with her. And I think it has something to do with the authenticity of the conversations, the fact that we know each other a little bit better and can pull stories out of the other. And so we decided that we were going to start a second show. And the format is each episode is 20 to 30 minutes on a single topic with actionable steps after each. We talk about nutrition, personal development, mindset, and fitness. And so far, the response has been incredible. So if you're interested in the conversations that we've had on this show, I know you will love that one. So go check it out. Let me know what you think. Let's get into this episode. Coach, welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kaz.
Yep.
Really nice to be here.
Oh, it's so good to see you, man. On our last show, we talked all about my SEALFIT experience and a lot of your philosophy. And on that show, I made it very clear that going through Kokoro, not only once, but twice, is one of the most impactful experiences of my entire life. And so I just want to thank you again for the impact that you've had on my life, as well as everyone that's going through Kokoro, going through Unbeatable Mind, and reading your books, and just the stand that you're making in the world, man. Thank you so much.
That's cool. Well, thanks for doing the work.
Absolutely, man.
You're the one that did the work.
Right. So last time we talked all about the kind of high level principles of SEALFIT. And today I want to talk a little bit more about your evolution as a man and a warrior. I know that a big part of your work in life is being an example for other people. And you have gone from, what seems like an ordinary man to an absolute warrior in every way. And I think that you are a living, breathing example of what it means to be a warrior and a man. And so I want to start to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Let's do that.
You talk a lot about self-mastery. What does that mean to you?
Well, to me, it's the journey of uncovering your true identity, who you really are at one level. So there's self-awareness. And then with the deepening awareness of, your essential nature, as well as what it is that you're meant to do in the world, right? So that would be, let's say, your unique calling, as well as how you're uniquely designed to fulfill that calling, right? So there's a lot of attributes in just that self-awareness part, but then also the daily cultivation of the skills that are going to allow you to deliver that calling in your unique way, in alignment with your purpose, with the most awareness possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's both tactical skills, such as the skills of, communication and showing up, in whatever domain it is that you've mastered. Let's say you as a fitness expert and a strength conditioning coach, and someone wanting to teach, mentally tough leadership and that type of thing. Well, there's a certain number of skills that you have to continually evolve and master yourself at. But then there's also the character skills that determine the depth of how you show up in your relationships. So, in a sense, to me, self-mastery is a whole philosophy. It's a way of living so that you can evolve yourself to perform better, but also to perform with more potential every time you show up to perform, and to make sure that that performance is in absolute alignment with what you're supposed to be doing, so you can always answer the question, why am I doing this and why is this happening to me?
Mm-hmm. Is there a moment in your life where you realize that that's what you were up to, self-mastery, that you were going to take on the challenge of mastering yourself?
It's a good question, when that really became kind of an overarching, or I had clarity around that overarching drive. I think I got glimpses of it when I started doing my Zen training in my first martial arts program, which preceded my entry into the warrior professions. Mm-hmm. Let's say when I joined the SEAL teams at 25, that was my first foray into the warrior professions. But 4 years prior to that, I got into the warrior arts. And had I just gotten into like a MMA, of course, MMA wasn't really big back then, but there was jiu-jitsu and there were other things that you could do, Chinese martial arts. Had I just gone in and gotten into like learning how to fight, or like learning self-defense, then I wouldn't have been exposed to this concept of self-mastery, at least in its pure form, as I was with my introduction to Zen, combined with the martial applications of, the skills of fighting. And it was that combination of the physical, mental, as well as the spiritual, that gave me a taste of what the self-awareness and the application of performance, those two, how they work hand in glove. Mm-hmm. But I don't think
this is around right after college for you, I think.
Correct. Right? Yeah. I started training in the Zen and the martial arts just a few months after I graduated from college. Mm-hmm. It's pure happenstance. I was like looking for something really to fill a block of time, because I was still doing my triathlon training and I was, trying to, just stay fit in this new white collar career that I had gotten into. And I was going to night school at NYU Business School, and I had a block of time in the evening, and I didn't want to just go to the gym. I was looking for something a little bit more, I don't know, something different. And that's when I came across the dojo, where I trained for 4 years. And I was just very fortunate, that when I stepped in there, I met a Zen master, right? And not just a karate guy. Mm-hmm. And he became my teacher. So back to your question, you get glimpses of it. Again, there wasn't a whole lot of languaging around it back then in the 80s. At least it wasn't obvious to me. I know there was some writing, and of course the ancient books like Book of Five Rings and the Eastern kind of approach was there if you looked hard and you knew where to find it, through the library system. Like, we didn't have the internet or anything. So it was really my first exposure to this idea that, there was more to life than just kind of getting up and going to work and maybe working out. So in the West, we've had that kind of one-dimensional look, and we compartmentalize things. So when I started to train physically, mentally, and spiritually, and then I later also learned that I was training emotionally and intuitively, but it wasn't obvious at first. That was my first exposure to this notion of self-evolution, like taking responsibility for your evolution and transformation, and that it was actually possible. Mm-hmm. So I experienced many kind of subtle transformations over the 4 years, all leading me from, going into New York after college, thinking I was going to be a white collar professional, make millions of dollars on Wall Street, before going back and running my family business and making millions of dollars there, to basically throwing it all away and leaving New York behind and going to SEAL training, via Officer Candidate School.
Mm-hmm.
So it set me on a warrior path that has never stopped. And the evolution of the warrior, back then I was very much in my 20s, a warrior athlete, and then a warrior, in the SEALs, I was a warrior leader. And then, later
what do you mean
on,
by that? A warrior athlete and a warrior leader?
Well, they're different kind of stages of development, I think, right?
Archetypes?
First, archetypal, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good way to put it. And that's kind of the term I use in Unbeatable Mind. Early on, the athleticism was a big part of it. And warriors are athletes. You have to have the physical structure and you have to train a certain way. But naturally, as you evolve, you're evolving your character, and you're going to be mixing it up a bit with other human beings. And so that leads to, development of some leadership capacity, as well as awareness of what it means to be led. And so you become a good teammate and a good leader. And so that then naturally transition. And also as you mature, you transition into roles where you don't leave the athlete behind and you don't leave the warrior behind, but you include now leadership. And so you become like the warrior athlete leader, but you can just call it the warrior leader. And then, as my career evolved, that turned more also into like a warrior strategist, right? So as leadership roles get more complex and organizations grow in number of, people and become more like running an organization instead of a team, that becomes a lot about strategy, right? And so you have the leadership and the strategy and the athlete all wrapped in the warrior archetype, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like refinements. You could even separate them out and call them different archetypes, but when they're bundled together, the warrior becomes the dominant archetypes. You never leave that behind. And so that warrior, there's certain aspects of the warrior piece that were prevalent throughout all those stages, right? And then let me just say, after the warrior strategist, become like the warrior monk, and that's the phase that I'm really heading into now, is much more interested in parsing through the spiritual development and what does that mean as a warrior, and how do you really evolve and use the training to evolve into that spiritual domain,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what does that look like, and how do you communicate that to others as a teacher? So I've been doing a lot of thinking around that recently. But so that kind of tracked loosely my evolution from, a 21-year-old warrior athlete, and then into the SEAL teams, becoming a warrior leader, and then, gaining rank in the SEAL teams as I went from junior officer to senior officer, becoming more of a warrior strategist. And then as I left there and became a teacher and an author, and my writings clearly have kind of a spiritual angle to them, in the sense that I'm trying to demystify it and look at it as like a human capacity that's meant to be trained
Mm-hmm.
and integrated. And so ultimately, also all those archetypes integrate into one whole person. It's not like you leave anything behind. They transcend and include each of the prior stages. So that's so self-mastery ultimately leads toward an experience of more wholeness and integration. And the more whole and the more integrated you get, the more sense you have that you're just kind of beginning the journey. And so it really is, there's no end point, right? There's no there. You just keep on evolving yourself and scraping off layers of stuff that doesn't belong, and uncovering, the goodness that's deep inside all of us, and then learning more and more how to express yourself positively and in a way that is very connecting, right? And so that experience of integration leads to you showing up as an even better, more authentic leader, but one who has got great care and concern for all of humanity and all sentient beings ultimately. And so your capacity for leading authentically from the heart with love expands through self-mastery because of this notion of integration. You become more whole. Mm. I know you didn't ask me that, but that was a little rabbit hole. I love going down those rabbit holes.
I appreciate that.
You never know what you're going to find down there.
I love podcasting with guys like you. I threw you a couple questions. An hour and a half later, there we are.
Exactly.
So one thing that you touched on, and one thing that I notice in a lot, when we hear about iconic warriors like Musashi,
right,
we always hear about the combination of the yin and the yang, right? The masculine and the feminine.
Mhm.
Why is that so important? And I feel like this is a foundational piece of self-mastery.
It really is. In fact, again, we can kind of relate it to how the Western world evolved. The Western world is all yang, and yang, people get hung up on masculine and feminine. We're talking about energy here, right? The energy of yang is about doing, building, task orientation, right? It's an outward focus. It's a grabbing or reaching for something, right? And so you can look at yang as the prototypical staunch individual, American or Westerner who's grasping for meaning outside of himself through conquering and building, right? And growing a business and that type of stuff. And it's certainly important. A lot of our Western accomplishment has come from that yang energy. The problem is when it's just the only energy that exists, you get the shadow side of it in equal doses, right? There's nothing to kind of receive the shadow energy. And so, we've now got, destroyed environment and massive, misallocation of resources and income inequality and civil unrest probably coming down the pike because of all this, and complete dysfunction in our ability to lead and govern because it's all been yang energy, or yang energy is actually more accurate. And so yin energy is receptive, creative, and it's the field of being, right? It's potentiation. In Unbeatable Mind, I call the yin energy the field of potential, and I call the yang energy the field of performance, right? And you can I often describe an infinity loop, and one side is performance, on the other side is potential, and they intersect. And where they intersect is kind of like the bleeding edge of awareness, right? You want to be right there where you're constantly re-energizing or connecting with and restoring your potential and enhancing or expanding that side of the infinity loop of your potential and expressing that potential powerfully in a flow state in performance, right? The further you get out into the bubble of performance away from potential, the more stagnant your performance is going to be, the less away from a flow state you're going to be, because the more doing, you're going to be too disconnected from your being state, which is a present state of awareness, as opposed to thinking, task orientation, doing. And you can look at this in the context of a now performance moment, or like performance over a long period of time. The further you get away from sitting down and just really contemplation, reflection, meditation, grounding and centering yourself every day and really making sure that what you're doing is on point, the more discord you're going to find, and the more things that you create are going to start falling apart, because you're operating totally with yang energy, and you're not balancing it out with the yin. And so I think a big part of our training, especially with men, is to get them to appreciate that yin energy is actually, it's equal as important, right? It's not just a little important, right? You're missing half the equation.
Right. You don't just recover, like you don't just treat it as like a way to recover from a workout. You practice it as if with the same intensity as you would everything else in your domain.
Correct. And that's such a great example of how it's played out, for those athletes and warriors who really get this principle, will put as much energy into recovery, sleep, recovery, downtime, how they take care of their body, receiving energy, learning to work with the breath, as they do with banging out, a wad, or doing the strength training, or doing, all the other stuff, the doing stuff. And so doing and being, being more with yourself, more, doing more yoga, more stretching, more mindfulness, more of that, they go hand in hand, right? And it greatly improves your performance. And absence of that will lead to some sort of breakdown, right, in your physical structure. And a lot of CrossFitters have experienced, burnout and adrenal fatigue and those types of things. And a lot of SEALFIT athletes too. And so we're big on, early on, we were like, okay, we really got to dial this in and elevate the importance of the recovery aspect and talk about it a lot. And so the 5 domains of SEALFIT, or 6 actually, which you experienced in full force at Kokoro Camp, are obviously strength training. Like, you got to have a broad base of functional strength to be fit like a special operator. but then you have to have that stamina, which is the ability to do a lot of work and over a long period of time. And you have to have endurance, which is the ability to get someplace, right? And so every domain of training that we address in SEALFIT really relates to kind of phases of a mission, right? So endurance is getting to the target. Durability is like you might have to work your ass off for an hour or two to get over the beach and get all your gear, loaded, and it's just like schlepping stuff around, and you got to train yourself for that or else you could burn out. And then strength is like that one time I might have to be able to lift that 55 horsepower motor over my shoulder, and that's a heavy piece of equipment. But if I can't do it, then I can't carry my load for the team. And then there is work capacity, which is kind of like a CrossFit training. So like we embraced CrossFit as a training methodology for one aspect of our workout, which was the 20-minute work capacity, because that's akin to the firefight, right? The SEALs, firefights don't last forever because people usually run out of bullets. And so but 20 minutes is about the time that a SEAL platoon could lay down lead, and have enough bullets. And if they're not out of the kill zone by then, they're screwed. And so, but it's 100% intensity. And so you got to train for that too. And then where I'm going with this is that, of course, there's mental toughness. That's the fifth. And the sixth, though, is the piece that we put equal amount of energy in that a lot of other people just completely blew off. We call that durability. And that's your ability to stay in the fight, stay in the war over, 20 years or stay in the force, right? And that required, proper, a real sensitivity and a look at how you fuel, how you sleep, how you recover, right? Listening to the rhythms of your body and being really smart about how you develop durability as a human being. So A, if you don't break or break down, and B, if you do break, right, you're able to continue to perform and also get back in the fight really quickly. And so it was a lot of our work with durability that led us to a lot of the practices, physical, mental practices, to learn how to recover and learn how to draw energy in instead of always expending it. And that became a big part of the SEALFIT methodology, right?
So it's like the difference of saying, I want to compete. I want to place as high as possible in the open next year, and I'll do whatever it takes to get there. Versus I'm in this to be the best athlete that I can possibly be and to reach my full potential, and I'm going to treat myself as if I'm in this for the next 20 years. Is it something like that?
Very much so, because a whole different why behind that as well. And so one of the things that I try to get across with SEALFIT is to make sure you're clear about why you're training. And that if you're training to win something, you're probably in the wrong place with SEALFIT, because we want to win the mission as a team. But after this mission is another mission, and then another, and then another, and then another, right? We're not trying to peak for one single event. And so what we're trying to do is to, if like on a scale of 0 to 10, we want to get up to the 8 to 9 range of performance and stay there and have very little fluctuation at that point, instead of having these big long peaks and troughs of, that the typical athlete will have as they're peaking for an event like the CrossFit Games. And also, again, what is the meaning of a win, right? Are you trying to beat somebody? In the SEALs, we weren't trying to beat anybody. We trained and we competed to improve ourselves, but it wasn't to prove that we were better, right? It was to make sure that we were going to be the best we could be as a team. And that meant we all needed to push each other. And so we developed a form of coopetition, right, instead of competition.
Coopetition, I like that.
And that was really effective because we were pushing and challenging, but we weren't doing it with an egoic sense of, you got to win, or you felt disappointed or less than if you didn't win a particular, foot race or swim or obstacle course or something like that. And so we use physical training to improve our overall capacity as an operator to get the job done, to get the mission done. And then in that regard, the why behind training was really different, and it became an imperative. Like, you didn't miss training. And also, we weren't trying to peak for a particular op or a mission, right? Now, some guys would go off and, like Josh Bridges, while he was a SEAL, he was training for the games, and that's a little bit different. You might have a specialty sport or something like that, but generally speaking, most of us are in this for life, and we want to be training sanely forever.
Right.
You know, I'm, you know, hoping that I'm doing my 300 burpees and my yoga and whatever else, you know, when I'm 150,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
I love it, man.
if God wants me to live that long. If not, then I'll probably die doing burpees someday, you know?
Yes. So I feel like I'm in a huge transition in my life. I'm 28 going on 29, and I really feel like I'm moving into a place where my focus is more on leading others than focusing on my own preferences, for instance. Right. And one thing that I really feel like is continuing to hold me back is comparing myself to others rather than comparing myself to myself. Right. And it's not black and white. I definitely have a lot of self-motivation, but there's still this side of me that compares myself to others. Mm-hmm. And I know that even though you've had this incredibly successful career, you're continuing to go into the unknown, entrepreneurship, podcasting, etc. How do you deal with comparison to others, or is that even a thing that still pops up into your mind?
Less and less, but I'm not going to, you know, it'd be hubris for me to say that it doesn't still exist, because I think it's a very natural part of being human, and especially in our culture. Mm-hmm. So our culture really glorifies the individual, and it glorifies, you know, individual beating or being better or better looking or being more successful or having more Facebook likes, you know, or winning something, right? And so everyone's striving to be the best at something, and so that requires that you are better than someone else, which requires some sort of measurement and tracking or judgment, right? And you are very wise to feel into that and recognize that that's a negative energy, like it's a primordial negative energy of not feeling whole and quite content with who you are, and looking outward at another, you know, at somewhere else to see kind of how you stack up on how you rank. And that kind of relates earlier to what we were saying earlier about this dominant yang kind of energy that we have, right? Because compare yourself and to compete is a very yang energy. When you begin to develop the practices or work the practices that develop the yin energy, or the receiving, the creativity, creation, and the beingness of Kaz, then what evolves is this sense that, hey, I'm all right the way I am. And I'm also flawed. I'm not perfect. So I'm going to strive every day to improve myself. But ultimately, what's here is enough. Mm-hmm. And I'm worthy, right? And I don't need to beat anybody to be enough. So, like for me, when I launched this podcast, it was like, hey, let's do a podcast. I wasn't trying to compare myself to any other podcast or trying to fit a certain niche. I was just wanting to share what we were doing with Unbeatable Mind. And I had a lot of turf to cover in that vein, because, you know, Unbeatable Mind is fairly broad, and it touches a lot of different people and a lot of different things that we can talk about. And I think it's cool. Like we had for a while, I don't know where we are. I don't look at rankings. I don't look at reviews. I haven't read a single review for any of my books, and people think that must be crazy, but I don't do it. I don't use my own social media, although I'm going to start engaging a little bit more in the future, because I'm going to take the Mark Divine brand and like kind of put a little bit more care and feeding into it, because I realize that when it's all wrapped up in my companies, it doesn't always, the potential is there that it doesn't represent me adequately, especially in sales cycles and stuff like that. So, but my point is that I'm not on social media. I am, but I'm not personally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't get wrapped up in negativity or people bashing me, or, you know, there's always going to be someone who doesn't like what you do, and it's just the way it is. Who cares, right? And I'm not following what my peers are doing. I'm wishing them the best. You know, like my teammate Jocko came out of the gates swinging hard, and like he's just crushing it. And I think that's awesome. Whereas I've been more like I'm like the hare or the rabbit. You know, no, the rabbit. What is it? The turtle in the hare. I'm more like the turtle, right? I've been going I've been at this, with started SEALFIT in 2006, and I'm just kind of cruising along. I'm minding my own business, trying to stay authentic. I've got a ton of book ideas. I got a book coming out next March with St. Martin's on authentic, how to lead authentically with a team and develop an elite team. I've got another book coming out that I don't even have a published date. I'm just going to put it out when I feel the timing's right. I'm not in a race. I think that's a problem, right? People get this feeling that they have to be there now, and then they miss now, right?
Right.
Miss just the being. And so for you at 28 to start to discover this concept would be just awesome for your life, because the more you can be and just be authentic and do the work to continue to evolve your authenticity, so you can express yourself authentically without comparison, without judgment, without all that kind of negative energy, I think the more people will be attracted to your work as well. And that's what I'm experiencing with my work. The right people are going to be attracted to it. And you really don't need, a tribe of millions. You just need a tribe of like 100 or 200,000 really, really committed people who just love what we're doing. And then they embody what you're talking about. And that's what it means by leading by example. Like, you show up with the whole full intent that everybody ultimately surpasses you in the knowledge and wisdom, right? And then they embody, and then they go teach, and with that same attitude. And we can change the world that way, right? Because we're doing it one person at a time, but the person that's most important is you or me, right? I work on myself, and then just through the simple act of communicating like this, or communicating through a book or my own podcast, or through me standing in front of training a group at Kokoro Camp, or a speech. All I got to do is stand up in front of people and be myself. It's like the easiest job in the world, right? The hard part is learning how to be yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the yin part. And that's the part that a lot of people shy from, because it's hard work. It really is hard work. Like, this book I'm writing, or just finishing up with St. Martin's, has been the most vulnerable book I've written, because I go through all these disasters I've had in trying to lead other people. And, I make this premise that, when I was a leader in the SEALs, it was easy because the SEALs did most of the work for me, right? The people that I was around were handpicked and trained for several years before they were on my team. The organization demands excellence and has a cultural code of honor, all these different things. And so building an elite team and leading in the SEALs was freaking easy. When I got out, started my first business, I realized, wow, it's not so easy, right? Out here in the real world. And you got to actually work on your character and develop the depth for trust and respect and honor and courage and alignment to all occur. So, and all that came from your question about comparison, but it's very, relatable, because ultimately you want to get to a point where you don't give a shit, right? It's like the guy who wrote the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. You shouldn't give a fuck about what other people think, and nor should you compare, because that's a contentment killer, right? You're always going to have what my friend Christine Hassler calls an expectation hangover, when you start, expecting certain results to be, to be better or the same as somebody else. They got their journey, you got yours. Wish them the best, right? Be happy for their success, and just focus on what you need to do every day to show up fully and do your work.
So let's dive even a little further into this yin yang concept. I feel like we'll use my life as an example here. I think that in my work, I'm very yang, right? I'm trying to build a business. I'm leading a lot of people. I'm still doing very intense workouts. And over the past 10 years, I've incorporated more and more what I would call yin activities, like meditation and yoga and journaling and reading and writing. And yet I feel like all of that, I'm doing a lot of that from a yang perspective. I'm planning all of it. It's very structured. And at this point in my life, I don't feel like I am embodying the balance, right? I feel still up in my head a little bit, and like it's not, there's not enough being in my life. What advice would you have for me or anyone else that's kind of in that boat?
I think it kind of reminds me where everyone's going with this, the hacking kind of industry, where everything is a hack, and you schedule it in, and eventually you're tracking everything, and right, that's all doing stuff. You're right. Being, I think, where I breakthrough for me was realizing that every moment, every interaction with another human being, to include your interactions with yourself, is an opportunity to practice being. And remember, I mentioned that infinity kind of symbol, the loop, and what I'm talking about is cultivating the capacity to be right at the center of that, so that, like with a breath, like with the inhale, you can look within and access, your beingness, and with the exhale, you can verbalize, which is a doing act, right? You can communicate, or you can do something. And that's more of a metaphor, but it's also kind of an accurate statement.
I've seen you do that multiple times on this podcast already. You take a deep breath and then you verbalize.
Right. And so what I'm doing with the breath is I'm checking in with my being. I'm not thinking. I've trained my mind to click off the thinker and to go into the direct perceiver, what I call the witness in Unbeatable Mind training. And from that place, right, it allows for maybe a little bit of a different outcome, a different, more authentic, more better response. And so that's a way to practice being more, is to look at it as like right now, like as we're talking, this is your opportunity to breathe into, instead of thinking about every word I'm saying, just breathe in and relax your mind. One of the images I use in my meditation, the difference between being and doing, or relaxing your mind and gripping on a thought, is imagine your brain like a hand, and thinking is like a closed fist, right? It feels contracted, almost like you're contracting your brain muscle. And then when you inhale and say, okay, just stop thinking, relax, and you open your hand and you have this kind of expansiveness, almost like you're pulling away from your frontal lobe, where you're thinking, and then boom, and you're going more into that perceiving mind. And then thought will stop. Now, this is a advanced skill that accrues from the practice of concentration and mindfulness. So those two skills give you the exact experience I just described. Concentration training, such as box breathing, gives you that kind of
box breathing for people that aren't familiar with it.
Sure. Box breathing, I mean, we could spend hours talking about box breathing. I've been teaching it to SEALs and SEAL candidates since 2006. Most people now think the SEALs teach box breathing. They didn't and don't, actually. It's SEALFIT that teaches box breathing, but now a lot of SEALs are using it. So box breathing it's got a physiological aspect, and it's got the psychological aspect. Physiologically, what we're doing is we're controlling the breath pattern, and we're slowing it down, and we're inhaling through the nostril, and the breath pattern has a hold, an inhale hold and an exhale hold. And the reason we call it a box breathing is because it's in a pattern of a box. There's many different ways to breathe and patterns to breathe. And now breathing is becoming, kind of a fad, which has its pros and cons, which we could talk about later. But so box breathing is a very safe and effective tool that has what we call an arousal control feature. And the arousal control is the fact that when you breathe through your nostrils and you activate your diaphragm, you're stimulating the vagus nerve and your automatic nervous system, which triggers the parasympathetic response, which is the rest and digest. So just by doing box breathing, you are doing a practice. It's a yin practice. Even though you're doing something, it's a practice that's stimulating recovery. And the more you practice it every day, it's meant to be a daily practice. I do like 20 minutes every morning. The more you practice it, the more your breathing patterns then slow down. And when you're not doing the box breathing, you'll end up breathing in a nice, slow, rhythmic pattern with maybe 6 to 8 breaths per minute, which keeps you very calm. It keeps you in that non-aroused state. And as an athlete or a warrior, that's a very valuable thing to have happen or to train for, because you're going to be able to be calm. Now, the psychological impact or effect of box breathing is really cool, because first, from an objective point of view, when your body's calm, your mind is going to be subjectively experienced as calm, because your brain, which is the objective tool, the objective organ, the brain experiences a lessening or a lowering of the frequency of the electrical patterns, right? What's picked up in acute EEG. So alpha, beta, delta, theta. Mm-hmm. So box breathing will take you, generally speaking, if you're really agitated or, just running and gunning, you're going to be in a high beta or even a gamma state. And box breathing takes you into a low beta, high alpha state, which is very, very creative and spontaneous. And, you're going to be able to access flow a lot easier from that brainwave capacity. And also, you're going to experience a little bit more space between your thoughts. So subjectively, you're like, it's calming, right? Mm-hmm. And you feel like you're getting things under control. That's all happening just from practicing box breathing. But what I've learned through my meditation practice is that the entryway for meditation is not just to go straight to mindfulness or some sort of like non-dual state. It is concentration, learning how to take an object and to focus on it with such intense laser-like focus to where you're increasing the quality of the concentrated mind, the intensity of it, and increasing the duration of your ability to hold your attention on that object. And then increasing the speed at which you notice when your attention is removed from the object, moved on to something else, and you bring it back to the object. So with box breathing, this becomes a concentration practice when you attend it to, because the box pattern and or an image a visualized image of the box, or even the count. There's a few ways you can do it. Like inhale and visualize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold your breath, visualize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, hold your breath, visualize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, hold, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be a 5-count box breathing pattern where you're visualizing the count, and then that becomes the object of your concentration. So you just basically breathe for 20 minutes, staying focused on that box pattern or that count. And every time your mind wanders, you just bring it back to that. Concentration training has a profound effect on developing your brain's ability to focus, right? And this is why, Navy SEALs and even elite athletes like yourself have a pretty deep concentration, because your concentration was the barbell, right? And athleticism develops deep concentration because you got to focus on that one thing to the exclusion of all else, and you learn how to control the clutter in your mind. Well, box breathing is a way to continue that practice outside the gym and to do it wherever you are. Wherever you are, there you are, because you got the breath. And then, boom, you continue to practice the concentration, but it's also more subtle, right? And so with that subtlety, we begin to recognize that, like for an athlete, when you're not in the gym, your mind will tend to wander. But as soon as you hit that barbell, man, you lock right in. Mm-hmm. So box breathing will teach you how to remain concentrated in all environments, not just one you're familiar with or you've trained in. So that concentrated straight sense of mind plus the physiological arousal control is a really powerful 1-2 punch that, just brings enormous benefits to anyone, leader, athlete, mother, to remain calm and focused so they can focus on the right things at the right time, no matter what pressure is coming at them, mm-hmm. right? So this is all pretty much allows you, this is a practice of being more focused and more calm and overcoming stress that allows you to do or to perform more effectively. And it's the pathway into a deeper meditative practice, which then can train that witnessing process that I talked about earlier, where you start to release the grip of the mind. Because the concentration training, you're holding a tight grip, using the metaphor of the clasped hand, mm-hmm. on that one object of awareness, right? But when you then go deeper into mindfulness practice, you're going to release that grip, and you're just going to be in an ever-present kind of state of watching what's going on. And that has tremendous benefits too, but it's a completely different way of using your mind. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people miss that. They don't understand it. And they go right to mindfulness, or they go right to try to do what's called non-dual meditation. And their brains are racing all over the place because they haven't trained them to concentrate.
Right.
And then they fail,
Right.
Or they get frustrated, I should say.
Yeah. One of the biggest things I see getting in the way of people's performance or just their accomplishing of their goals is, one, we already talked about comparing themselves to others, but also self-doubt, fear, any sort of negative thinking, right? People just tend to get in their own way more than anything else. How does mindfulness play into that conversation? How does it help people with that?
Oh, and it's probably one of the most profound tools in developing greater awareness of what these negative patterns are that trip us up or slow us down. And everybody has them. These negative patterns are baked into us at a very young age. The first 20 years, usually in the first 6 to 12 years of our lives, but up to 20, when our brain, body, minds are forming. And they come from negative patterning or conditioning from our parents, from our friends, from society at large. And then we either we accept them and take them on, or we reject them, and that becomes a negative pattern, or we deny them, and those things. And this is what the whole field of psychology has been built up around. And again, in the West, we look at psychology as something that happens or you go to when you're broken, and I look at the field of psychology and therapy as something that's just really powerful to help us identify and understand the underlying conditioning that we all have, so that then you can work on that conditioning. You take it from subject to object, back, like we talked about before. So here's the deal. Mindfulness allows you to observe your patterns of thought and your patterns of emotion. And when you observe them, that's when the reason to journal is to journal what you're observing in your mindfulness, right? Just sitting down and journaling for the sake of journaling, it might be helpful for like writing practice, but generally what you're trying to do is observe the patterns of your mind and emotions and then reflect upon them through journaling. And what happens is you come upon, several like dominant themes, right? And everyone's going to have different dominant themes, right? There might be some addiction patterns, right? Addiction to work or addiction to some substance that's distracting you. Why is it distracting you? Because there's some underlying sense of not being whole or not being complete, right? Or maybe not feeling worthy or lovable, those types of things. And so, you've gravitated toward this as a substitute. So that's really powerful. You start to look at that pattern. You're like, there's something to work. That's something I can do, right? There's an object that I can. Let me put it this way. You've taken it from something that I am and turned it into an object, something that is happening to you or that you're doing, but it's not you, right? So now your awareness of those patterns gives you the potential to disidentify with it or detach from the energy of it, and then to examine it as an object outside of you, and to examine the roots of it, and to then, reframe the energy that caused, it to happen. Now, working with a professional therapist is really helpful, or, working in a process or program of emotional development is very helpful. This is something we spend an enormous amount of time with Unbeatable Mind, because it seems to be, or it is, I should say, the most difficult area for us at our stage of development to work on, because of this yang axis or yang kind of orientation that we've had, and this outward focus. And it's like painful work. It's hard. When I say the work of the inner domain is hard, it's really this emotional development that's hard. So can mindfulness help? Absolutely. In fact, it's a really powerful skill. And the only other, skill that comes close to it is curated, therapeutic process, which is having an expert basically help you point out the patterns to yourself through a dialogue, right? Through a dialectic and other exercises. And then that professional can then help you turn that subject into object, and then work on that object until you can eradicate the negative tendency and transform that energy into something positive. But you can do it yourself. In fact, I think most of the Eastern philosophies, yoga, Buddhism, Zen, that was the main thing. And it just got completely lost when they were translated over here to the United States. And everyone thinks that yoga is just stretchy bendy, with a little breathing in there. And everyone thinks Buddha is religion, Buddhism's religion. And they were neither of them were meant to be that. They're meant to be a way to transform your mind and your emotions so that you can be the most complete human being possible. And they're practically identical in practice, but the words have been, culturally become stuck in the different, cultural traditions, right? Mm-hmm. But when I look at yoga and Buddhism, to me, they're really the same. They all come from the Vedic philosophies, and they're all about transformation of the human being, eradicating negative qualities and negative tendencies to allow your positive qualities to flourish so that you can integrate and be whole and express yourself as the highest level. And that's profound that's existed for thousands of years in Eastern philosophy. And we're just barely scratching the surface here in the West. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are using meditation to enhance their performance or to make more money or to show up or to lose weight. And it will help, those things will happen. But if they're the main point, then you're doing it for the wrong reason, right, in my opinion, So sorry, I went down another rabbit hole.
Oh, I love it, man. Yeah. Are there any fundamental resources, books, teachings that people can look to learn more about what you're talking about right now?
Yeah, there's a few. One is, I'll plug my own book because I wrote Unbeatable Mind to try to demystify some of these practices. So I go into box breathing and concentration and then the witness practice, which is a really powerful form of mindfulness, but it's a directed mindfulness. So that's Unbeatable Mind. I think that's a good tool. And then there's one of my mentors, and I actually done some work with him, done a podcast with him, and he helps frame some of our work in Unbeatable Mind, is Ken Wilber, founder of Integral Theory. Now he's got a book called Integral Meditation, which is really cool because he looks at it from a developmental psychology point of view and uses mindfulness to help you eradicate your negative tendencies from all the different stages where you could have shadow, aspects kind of lingering from different stages of your own growth as a human being. And he has a process for you to help look at those or uncover those and then to deal with them. It's pretty cool. There are a lot of other meditation books that are great places to start. And I'm just like blanking on them right now. John Kabat-Zinn is a great one to investigate. He's got some books out. He's the founder of Spirit Rock, and that's all based on mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction. If someone really wants to go deep into learning the skills, then you can get these 8-week. I've done 3 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction courses. They're great. They usually meet like once a week, and you get a really good deep dive on mindfulness. Yeah, I wish I had more to offer in that regard, because most of the texts are kind of esoteric. That's why I like Wilber's work. He demystifies it. I try to demystify it and take the cultural context out. I'm not trying to teach Buddhism or yoga, and I like to say I take the foo out of the kung fu. Nice. Because guys like you and me and a lot of our people who are following your podcast, they're like, yeah, that's interesting, but it's not for me. You know what I mean? Right. I'm not gonna dress up weird and say namaste all the time, Right. But the tools are freaking powerful. So we want to use the tools.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but by far the most important thing is that people actually go out and practice, right? That's what these texts are trying to get us to do anyway. That's right.
Yeah. They're basically saying, go do the work every day, practice. Mm-hmm. The yogis used to practice, 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. A lot of them with very little sleep. And that's been greatly inspiring to me, both the martial arts and yoga. Because when you read some of these ancient texts, they're talking about yogis who are basically like you and me, like they're super athletes. But it's because they're trying to refine their bodies so that they can train their mind and their emotions and their spirits, right? Because they need to be sitting in meditative postures for long periods of time. And so they train really hard and they eat very little. And now they meditate, right? And do all these different practices, which include visualization and breath control and deep work on eradicating their negative tendencies. And then as they evolve, they develop these incredible skills, right? And they can live for a very long time. So it's really inspiring to me. So I think that's, we're trying to use science to figure out what the yogis have already figured out. Right. Whereas I want to use the tools the yogis use.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not adverse to, also tapping into science as long as it's not going to change my ultimate nature as a human being. Right. So I'm not going to like plug my brain into the internet someday or anything like that. But, if there's longevity tools that are healthy and make sense, sure, maybe we'll play with those a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, the advanced yogis had it going on, right? They had figured out how to take control of physiology, and biology, and to really heal themselves and to heal others, and to, longevity became kind of an option, not an option for them. They were just lived until they were done living, It's pretty cool. I love that stuff.
Usually when we talk about growth in any area or self-mastery, I think most people think about think about things that they have to add to their life. But what I'm starting to learn about, about success in general, about mastery in general, is a lot of it depends on what you remove, right?
Yeah.
About like getting really, really dialed into what moves the needle for you in particular. What's been some of the biggest things that you've removed from your life that have had the biggest effect, or that you see getting in the way of people's pursuit of self-mastery?
Yeah, I think there's so much that can be removed, and to me it becomes a practice in and of itself. And we actually call it a practice in Unbeatable Mind, and we use the KISS principle to kind of frame it up. Keep it simple, Sally. Less is more. What can you take away, right? And so we have people do the Pareto 80-20 analysis on what it is that they do. And so we want to look at all the easy stuff first. Like, what is it that you do? And even what is it that you have, right? So work on the doing and have. What is it you have that you don't need? A lot of people have a lot more shit than they need. So start getting rid of that. And then you start to feel lighter because we have a little bit of attachment to all these things that we have or we buy. And so start letting go of that stuff, or at a minimum, let go of your attachment to it, right? So that energy is gone. So you can experience the simplicity by detaching or not remaining attached mentally or emotionally to anything. And then what is it you're doing? So like I've given up most day-to-day operational tasks in my business because I'd much rather be focused on the creative tasks like what we're doing right now, podcasting, inbound and outbound, and writing and creating curriculum and teaching and whatnot. And so, I've really narrowed down my operational duties to just a few hours a week. Me meeting with, my key team players who I put in those roles to handle all that stuff. That was huge for me. And then probably the biggest is who I associate with. I really more inclined to say no to, engaging with socially, and sometimes that can, that can cause problems with my wife, who wants to be more social. But, because there's a lot of energy that gets sucked into excessive, socializing, social engagement. Like I said earlier, I don't engage on social media because I just don't want to use my energy that way. And we have a limited amount of energy, and you're constantly trying to figure out what's the balance and what do I spend, like literally look at my energy like a bank account. What do I want to spend my energy, my available energy today? And as it gets depleted, I've got to restore it. And so I'll stop doing and or make sure I build time in to restore and recover. Then I think you just got to look deeper within and ask yourself, what am I holding on to in terms of belief systems and storylines and need or, desires that could be driven by some sort of pattern that doesn't necessarily serve you. Like, so one I've been dancing with is I have an incomplete PhD. I mean, I was in a doctoral program for leadership, and then I got recalled to go to Iraq as a reserve SEAL back in 2004. And I ended up leaving the PhD program, and also as an adjunct professor. And when I was in Iraq, I had these kind of awakening moments where I was like, you know what, that's not the right path for me. And so I never finished. I came home and started focusing on my business, and that led to SEALFIT. So I never finished my doctorate. And so, me, I don't quit, right? So there's been this thing hanging over my head, and not a heavy, weight over my head, but it's been always there. It's like, do I want to finish my PhD? And I even reached out to USD, and they said, yeah, come on, put an application in, you probably come back, and we'll give you some credit, not a lot of credit, but some. And so I'm kind of dancing with that. I don't think I'll do it at USD, but I'm dancing with that. Do I want to, and do I need to? Right? Is it something that I should just let go of? Right? And simplify, because if I go finish my PhD, now we're talking, okay, there's another 4 to 5 years of, I'm adding complexity, when I do that. And so my saner moments, I realize I don't need the PhD. I'm just living out a pattern that says that quitting is bad and that I should finish what I started. And then, then my intellect says, yeah, but you really are interested in learning that stuff. Right. And then my emotional self says, you know what, you can learn this stuff by reading books, and you already are. And you probably know more than half the professors. So maybe you'll get into it and quit again because you realize, it was the wrong thing to do. And so the point I'm making is I get this. That's why I haven't pulled the trigger on it. And I'm now turning it into an object of, it wasn't a big deal. But now as I get closer to looking at it and I have the time to do it, I'm like, okay, now it's time to take a serious look at this potential commitment as well as the storyline behind it and say, does this belong in my life? Because if I take it on, it's breaching the KISS principle. And so it better be a damn good commitment to take on. It might be it's got to be the right thing for the right reasons. The stories have got to back up the emotional energy around it's got to support it. Right. That's just one example. And so there's a lot of the flips that, and here's the other part about this. The good news is I'm doing all this before taking it on. The bad news would be, hey, I took on this PhD program and now I'm like really resenting it and meeting a ton of resistance because I just don't know if it's the right thing for me. Right. And so how often do people blindly jump into things that seem good or, that they're doing it because of the social pressure or whatever out of some sort of fear-based need. Right. People take jobs like that all the time because, oh my God, I need to get that income flowing. And so they jump into a job that's not right. And sure, they get some incoming, but they're miserable. And so they jump to the next thing and then the next thing. And, 10 years go by and you're like, it's really rough. I have a lot of clients, who find that, 10 or 20 years go by and they just haven't found that thing that they're really love and that they're meant for because they're operating out of fear of loss, fear of not having enough. Right. And so if they could slow down and just examine the fear and, figure out what's underneath that and really breathe into their beingness, then they'll be able to create, right, from the silence and from the stillness, what it is they're meant to do in life.
That's beautiful.
A lot of these principles really do overlap, right? The more you practice these inner skills of being, the less you tend to want to take on in life. Of the wrong things, I should say, of the things that don't fit, because you become really clear about what is right for you, the right people, the right tasks, the right companies to be involved in or to start, or, and you become much more focused and powerful because you're able to say no to 90% of the crap that comes your way, including your own crap. You know what I mean? Your own stories and beliefs. You look at those and be like, oh, there's a residue of a, early developmental shadow coming up there. That fear of, for me, it was chasing degrees, but now I realize I don't have to chase degrees. I don't need just yet another degree.
Right.
And I think a lot of people chase degrees just to, so they look good on a resume.
100%.
It's kind of like what you were saying, because they want to compare when they want, they want to be seen as the smartest or the most educated. Right?
Significant in some way, right? We all want significance.
Yeah. When you practice your being, the significance comes from a deep sense of self-worth and worthiness. And you don't need to prove it to anybody with any degrees or whatnot. Now, if you're meant to be a doctor or a research scientist, then of course you have to get a degree in our world to do that, to be taken seriously. So you go for it, right? And it's joyful for you.
And it won't come from a place of, I need this to fit in or to
Right.
fulfill my parents' or society's desires. It comes from something deeper.
Something deeper. But, let's say back to the warrior archetype. Like if I do this, when I was in my meditative state and I began to sense that I was a warrior, there's a lot of different ways you can fulfill your warrior archetype. But for me, there was a very specific structural way I felt that I was meant to do it because of my physical athleticism and the imagery I started to get. And that was leading me toward the military, and not just anything in the military, but, an elite special ops unit. And that's when I learned about the SEALs. I didn't all of a sudden have an epiphany on the meditation bench that I was going to be a Navy SEAL, because remember, this is 1986, 87. There really wasn't a whole lot of information out there about the SEALs. There were a couple books from Vietnam, but there was no internet, no TV shows about it, no movies about it. So what I saw on the meditation bench was a facsimile. And then, a few days later or weeks later, I stumbled past the Navy recruiting office in Midtown Manhattan, and I saw a poster. And the poster didn't say anything about the SEALs, but it had a bunch of imagery from the SEALs, and it just said, "Be someone special" across the top. And right there, I knew that was it. Whatever that was, I was going to be that special.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in and asked, what is that? What are they doing? And the recruiter's like, "Well, you don't want to do that, right? Those are the Navy SEALs. They're a bunch of snake eaters. And I got something else for you." I said, no, you don't get it. I want that, whatever that is. I've seen it in my meditation. I've seen that.
He's like, "Sure you have, kid. Sure you have."
Exactly. He's like, "Yeah, right. Whatever. Tell me another story."
So I think this is a good place to stop in a second here, because I think that many people listening to this show, they really get the yang portion of this, right? But so many of us are either interested, or some of us not even conscious of the fact that we need more yin in our life before this podcast, before hearing you share about this. Is there any more, do you have any more guidelines on how we can lean into more being outside of meditation and mindfulness practice?
Yeah, I would say you hit it on the head with the idea of simplicity. A lot of people are going to think, "Oh, I got to layer in, 5 more things every day," and then that task saturation starts to overwhelm. But everyone listening probably has some sort of morning routine. You have a morning routine, whether it's good or bad, or you're even aware of it, right? And so the best way to begin or to deepen your yin practice, or your practice of being, is to carve out deliberate practice every day in the morning. And I recommend 10 minutes to 20 minutes. 20 minutes was really optimal. Longer as you get more effective, but until you become effective, longer can actually be detrimental, right? Because you're going to end up resenting it or feeling like you're not making progress. Mm-hmm. And if 20 minutes is too long, then do 15 or 10, minimum 5 minutes, right? And to begin with just box breathing as a physiological practice for 5 minutes. Let's say it's a 10-minute practice. 5 minutes of box breathing just as physiology, just for the arousal control, and 5 minutes just for the concentration training. And then if it's a 20-minute practice, do 10 minutes of box breathing for the arousal control, and then 10 minutes for the concentration training. And then just reflect upon what your experience was, because there is also a mindfulness benefit to box breathing, because what you'll notice is that it's hard to maintain your concentration on that box pattern for 10 minutes, and your mind is going to wander. And so the mindfulness comes in that when you notice your mind wanders, notice it, like acknowledge it and be like, "Oh yeah, I am now noticing that my mind wandered." And now what you're developing is metacognition, which is your ability to think about your thinking, which is the first layer of mindfulness, which is so powerful, because then that skill you take into the real world, and now you're having a conversation, and part of you is saying, "Wow, I'm having this conversation, but I'm actually being able to think about the conversation while I'm having the conversation." So it's almost like you partition your hard drive, That's the first level of power for mindfulness. So just practice that, mm-hmm. and be patient, like really, really patient. Remember, there's no there. This is not a race, and you're not trying to beat Mark Divine or Kaz in meditation or box breathing, right? You're not trying to earn a black belt in either of these skills. You're just trying to become more aware and connect deeper to your essential nature, your essence, your power, your potential. So just practice this for like 6 months. That's a power right there is a powerful practice, even a year. Then come back to this podcast and we'll have a follow-up, right?
There you go.
We'll go into like the mindfulness part and how to really deepen that. Just do that. It'll be such a game changer, right? And that's what we start everyone on with Unbeatable Mind training. And we ask, just do that, right? And we'll do that for a year while we work on, awareness in other areas. But it's that foundational practice. If you don't have that, then everything else that's built upon that is impossible to build, right? It's kind of like the underlying strength lifts. If you don't have that strength, it's hard to do a lot of the faster, like Olympic lifts and whatnot.
Right.
So that's your foundational practice. All the other things like being, mindfully aware while you're communicating and while you're, doing these other things so that you can have that yin yang expressed like in precise balance every moment to moment. That comes as a result of building this foundational practice in every morning.
I think what you said about the adage, there's no there, I think that is the most important piece, because this is not something that, at least in my experience, as well as those of the others that I've heard, it's not like a very quick and radically transforming practice. It's a very subtle thing. It's almost like gaining weight, right? You start to, you adapt as you're gaining weight so that you don't even notice it. Sometimes you may not even notice that you're beginning to change, but it's just a commitment to the path that I think is important.
Right. The only caveat to that I would say is if an individual has no breath practice, then adding box breathing can lead to some real like supercharged evolution very quickly. And that's both really exciting, but it's also an obstacle because I've had a lot of students be like, yeah, box breathing has changed my life and blah, blah, blah. And they mistake it for a there.
Right.
Like, I'm there.
Yeah,
I got this. Yeah. Check. I know what you're talking about now.
Amazing.
And then what happens is they keep practicing, but then they don't have the next level of transformation, because that was like, there's so much that happens when you start a breath practice like that. A lot of toxins boiling out and a lot of clarity can come. There's just a lot that happens very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then you settle down into kind of like what you're talking about. Every day you just show up and train, but you can't benchmark it like a physical training regimen, right? Mm-hmm. You can't track how many reps or how much weight you've lost. Just what you want to do is just track that you're doing it every day. And then what happens is every once in a while, and this is again why journaling is so powerful, is every once in a while you look back and you're like, wow, I'm different. And it crept up on me. Mm-hmm. I didn't even notice, right? And so like you said, you can be different in a worse way or less effective way by not doing these things and gaining weight or developing low-grade anxiety over time because you feel like you're not doing what you're meant to do. This is how disease creeps up on people. And they think, oh my God, I had disease because my parents had disease. No, you have this disease because you allowed it to creep up on you through lack of awareness and lack of skillful practices and means over a 20-year period. And then lo and behold, there it is. Whereas like starting a practice like we're talking about, or practices like we're talking about, leads you in the other direction toward optimal health, where you'll never need, to go see a doctor except for that annual checkup. And you'll have your optimal body size and body composition, and you'll sleep really well, and then you'll gain greater and greater clarity about who you are and what you're meant to do in this life, and you'll stop comparing yourself to others, which is where we kind of started this whole conversation.
Amazing. And then if you're the type that desires to lead, even if you don't, people will just be more attracted to you.
Right. It's the shortest training in leadership. I mean, not short in terms of doing the practice, right, but the shortest course in leadership is become worthy of leading others, right? It's about your character. People want to know that you respect them and that you trust them and that you have to be trustworthy and respectable in order for that. It's almost like a mirror. The more you work on yourself, the more effective you'll be as a leader.
Coach, thank you so much for your
wherever you go, there you are. Right?
Beautiful, man. Thank you so much for your time, man. It's been such a pleasure to catch up with you. Where can people find out more about your books, the camps and everything like that?
So markdevine.com is my new kind of personal website, and I have all the information about all the different programs there. SEALFIT.com has the detailed schedule and information for the training that you've undergone, the Crucible training, the hardcore. And then unbeatablemind.com is our a vertical leadership development, right? The place where we go deep on coaching leaders how to cultivate these skills that we've been talking about.
That's where you get the level 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Coach. Talk to you soon.
It's been a blast. Thanks, guys. Yeah.
This episode is finished, but your training journey continues. Head over to brutestrengthraining.com/SSW and grab your free pack of 32 accessory workouts that you can incorporate into your training and start improving your strength immediately. That's brutestrengthraining.com/SSW.